start to put tension on my string drawback, I was like, okay, I'm gonna smoke.
It's him. You can look at the horns when he's dead. I'm in the zone. Let the arrow go. It's perfect.
When they lose their front shoulders, yeah, you start. Yeah, that's how you know they're smoking.
Went about 5-10 more yards. We probably went 20 yards a little bit, then we tried getting back up. I saw him pull up.
We rushed 14 rounds that night. We got like 156 and something like that, and then the next day we came out to 163 even.
You're listening to the White Cat Outdoors podcast, bringing you to the table where we talk about the outdoors.
Hello, what's going on, everybody? This is episode 130 of the White Cat Outdoors podcast. Me, Nick, and Tom are chilling in the studio tonight.
What's going on, everybody?
Glad to be here. And talked to Dad last week about Alaska. That was a great episode. Had a lot of fun. And we have been talking a lot about like getting ready for the whitetail season. So we have another guy on tonight who's big whitetail guy. He's really successful around the Northwest PA area where we're from. He does a lot of out-of-state hunting, a lot of public land hunting. So he's a big whitetail guy, very, very successful whitetail guy, a lot of knowledge. So we're all real excited to talk to him.
Yeah. His name's Mike Perry, and he's probably the highest caliber whitetail hunter we've brought on the podcast. So this is a pretty special episode, I think. Mm-hmm. He films for Whitetail Addictions. He's been featured on Whitetail Cribs with Exodus Trail Cameras. He's been on numerous podcasts, and I was really excited to get him on ours, and he just so happens to be a very local guy to us. Mm-hmm. He hunts the same terrain and same style.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to pick his brain on how he attacks public land, because a lot of what we talk about on here is how we set up our personal properties for bedding or food or whatever. So it's going to be a lot of fun to learn from him about how he goes about these new pieces that he goes on, or if it's an old piece, it's mostly public. So it's just going to be a lot of fun to talk to him and figure out how he goes about it.
For sure. So I guess let's not waste any more time. Let's bring him in, shall we?
All right. So Mike, nice to have you on. We're really happy to have you. If you want to just kind of give us a little rundown, what do you do for a living? Where did you get started with whitetail hunting, all that stuff? Just kind of keep it simple at first. Are you on social medias? Where can people find you if they want to, see what you're up to?
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. I'm glad to be here. My name's Mike Perry. I work at the Erie Times News. I'm a supervisor for transportation distribution. And I got into hunting, and it started in 1977 when I was 12. My grandparents owned a farm out in Crawford County. And I used to go out there and hunt with my grandpa, so he got me into it, small game and stuff like that. Didn't start bow hunting serious until about 1986.
Okay.
So I've been at it ever since then, pretty hard.
Got addicted pretty quick.
Pretty quick, yeah. The first year I shot 8-point with my bow and went and bought an Ohio license the next day. And ended up having a big one come in, like the first sit in Ohio. Yeah, hunting out of an old worn sweet climbing stand. So, yeah, I've been at it ever since then, just addicted to it.
Nice. And you said you kind of got started in archery right around that time. Were you deer hunting before that and then evolved into archery, or did you just kind of start with archery?
Yeah, like I said, when I was a kid, my grandpa would bow hunt on their farm, and I would squirrel hunt. So I would walk around and I'd stalk squirrels, and I think that is got me on my way to, learning a lot about whitetails, because I would stalk around on squirrels, try to get up on them close, and my grandpa would be hunting. Of course, every time I shot at a squirrel, my grandfather said there was a buck standing under him and it ran away, so it was my fault. Yeah. But I didn't start hunting deer until I was 16. It would have been about 81. My parents just didn't want me going out in the woods because, the largest armed militia in the free world, is first day of gun season.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, it was a lot bigger, There was way more people around. So I started then. I shot my first deer with a gun. I think it would have been my second year gun hunting. And so I always gun hunted up until like 86, and I started bow hunting. I got a compound and started bow hunting. So
right on.
So when you said it was in the 80s when you got serious, what was the tipping point for going from like just like your average bow hunting and everything to getting like addicted to it and diving like full force into it?
Well, one day I was bored at work, and it was my girlfriend's brother at the time. Ken Flack was his name, and he went and picked up a North American Whitetail for me, the read at
the
work.
magazine?
You know, yeah. So I was reading that, and I was seeing these pictures of these bucks in here, and I thought, wow, that would be really cool, you know. So I had the bow, you know, and I wanted to get into it. I had my first stand I ever had. I built into a tree, you know, with wood. I didn't know what I was doing. I just found some deer trails that came together. And it was, you know, just by mistake, I guess, there was a couple rubs around, and this buck come walking in behind me. And when I went to draw my bow back, I mean, like, I just fell apart. Like, I couldn't, my arrow came off the rest, and I was shaking like a leaf, and never did get a shot at the buck. But I knew right then and there that I wanted to feel that feeling again, you know. So that's what kind of started it. And then I was just fortunate enough that the next year, which would have been 86. And then in 87, I shot a buck on the first day over here in McCain, first day of archery season, an 8-point. And it was a small 8-point. I mean, back then, an 8-point might have been 10 inches. What's that?
There was no antler restrictions at the time, though, right?
No, there wasn't any antler restrictions at the time.
So that was a pretty good deer for the time.
Exactly. I was really happy with it, and but I didn't want to stop hunting. So I knew from reading this North American Whitetail magazine that, you know, you're allowed to hunt other states, because I never even thought about it until then. I had no idea that you could do that. I was like, wow, I can go get another. So I went and bought an Ohio license. Back then, it was $40 for an Ohio non-resident with your tags.
Gone up a little since then.
Yeah, it went up just a little bit, yeah. So I went and I drove around, and the first road I come down, there's a farmer standing outside. And I stopped and I said, hey, would you mind if I hunt? I live over in Pennsylvania. And he's like, no, go ahead. And I went back there, and I found a big scrape on the edge of the field. And the only reason why I knew what a scrape was because I read about it in the magazine, you know. So I had no idea. But what it was a trail that paralleled the field, which is a really good, you know, there's usually fields have trails that will parallel 40, 50 yards. And where, you know, deer will you know, be able to scent check whatever come out of that field. That bucks can scent check what's coming out of that field. So I didn't know it at the time, but it was a great spot. It was an inside corner, and it was right where this trail had come down. And there was this great big scrape that was just torn to pieces. And I climbed up it in my Warren Suite, and I'm sitting there, and it had cold front had rolled in. It was like it was either Halloween Day or November 1st. I remember that. And a cold front flew in, and you know, again, now that I know what a great situation I was in at the time, but at the time I had no idea what
Purely on accident.
It was all an accident, yeah. So I'm sitting there, and just as the rain had stopped and you could see the sky clear into the west and it's getting cooler, I hear this, and I was like, what in the heck is that? I never heard that in my life, you know? And I turn and I look over to the right, and here's a 130-inch 8-point walking straight at me, coming to that scrape. And he walks into the scrape and looks right up at me. And I didn't know, you know, what to do. I just thought I could just shoot him. And I drew back and I shot and just nicked him. And he took a couple steps and just stood there and looked at me. And I was just like, wow, welcome to Ohio, you know, my first day hunting there, you know. And I ended up killing that buck the next year after I figured him out more. But that year, couldn't get him near me, you know, after that, you know, mishap. But
He's a little
that's what
skeptical
started
after
me.
that.
Yeah, I really went after that deer hardcore. He taught me a lot. I talked about this before on a podcast, but that the next year, that was when I first realized that when you find a bed with a rub in it, that it's probably a buck bed, because I just so happened to be scouting, and where I had been parking my truck, it was real thick along the road for like 50 yards. I mean, thick. You could barely walk through it. And then one day I walked down through there, and I find this matted down area, and I'm like, wow, that looks like I think a deer's bed in there, and there's a rub, and there's shavings laying right there, and I'm like, it's got to be a buck. And I'm like, man, he's bedding right where I'm parking. This buck knows that I'm hunting him. Mm-hmm. You know, that was the same buck that I had hit the year before. So I decided to go down to the I parked like a half a mile down the road, and I put a stand up on a trail that paralleled the road that had scrapes on it. And I went in there. It was like mid-November, and I actually mew canned that buck in. And I didn't this time. I didn't have a perfect shot. So this time, though, I didn't take it, you know, which was good.
Yeah. And
I just kept scouting for that deer. One day, I was scouting, and we had this goldenrod field there. And I was walking through the goldenrod field, and it was raining, and this deer stands up in front of me. He must have heard me. He knew I was there or whatever, but it was that buck. He wasn't that far off the road. Or, I wasn't that far into the field, actually. He was kind of maybe 150 yards off the road. He stood up out of his bed, and when he stood up, I was behind him. So I sank down into the goldenrod, and I sat there, and I watched him. And he would just sit there, and he was looking down the road. He was looking all around at first, and then you could hear a car coming down the road. It was a gravel road. And you could hear the rocks popping, but he couldn't see the vehicle yet. And when the vehicle got closer, he sunk down in his bed, and he laid there, and then you couldn't see him anymore. And I'm sitting here, the whole time just watching him. I ain't far from him at all, maybe 30 yards or whatever. And then as soon as that, and this is towards the evening, as soon as that car kept going down the road, he stood back up, and then he just started walking off, feeding off, through the goldenrod, and then ended up going into the woods. And I'm like, man, okay, this deer is not stupid. He's, he knows when a vehicle's coming down the road to get out of sight. He's bedding somewhere near where I'm parking and watching what's going on. So I ended up shooting that buck there in gun season that year, just by chance. But yeah, that was an eye-opening experience, and that's what basically got me on the path of just trying to go full tilt on him.
It's amazing when you see stuff like that. Like, how often does that scenario play out where you're going in to get after a deer, and he's right there 30 yards from you, but he just dips right out of sight and lets you go on by?
Yeah.
How often does that happen that you don't catch it like
you don't
you
know
did
about
that
it
time?
exactly. I'm sure many times.
It makes me totally reconsider. We have the farm we hunt. There's it's on a dirt road, gravel driveway up to the barn, and it's like goldenrods before you get to the woods. And now I'm wondering if there's something bedded really close to the barn, hear us pull up, and they're just dipping out before you even get out of your truck.
It very well could be. I know that in farm country, you see a lot of deer bedding with a sight advantage, a sight
Up the
advantage.
road or
Yeah,
driveway access.
they watch the access, especially when they know they're being hunted. A lot of times if it's thick enough, where they could, have some cover and be able to watch your approach. A lot of guys, when they're hunting evenings, they just walk right through a field and go set up. And then they wonder why they're not seeing the buck that they're after. And a lot of times it's because that buck, I think, more than a lot of times it's because that buck is bedding there. That's like a wind specific type bed where, he's bedding there on a certain wind. So he's watching, what out in front of him, and then he can smell back behind him.
So a buck, I guess in your experience, when a buck knows he's being hunted, and is it more important to him to have the wind in his favor or seeing that access? Because he couldn't always set up with both of them in his favor, could he?
Could he set up with the wind advantage and a sight advantage? Definitely.
Well, yeah, I'm saying, but not every wind allows that. I guess what I was getting at is what do you feel is more important to him, or what you've seen?
I don't know what's more important to him, but I don't think that they're always setting up with a wind advantage. I think that they set up with a sight advantage a lot of the times. And if you're hunting in thick cover, I hunt a lot of swamps and stuff, and in swamps it's real thick, and they bed anywhere. They bed anywhere they want, anywhere they please. And they bed. Those aren't wind specific beds. They're bedding there with they're listening, and they definitely can smell, but they're using their ears in that situation more. Now, if you're hunting somewhere where there's a lot of people walking through all the time, say there's you're hunting down an Allegheny forest, or you're hunting I don't know, I'm not going to say the name of the place, but I hunt a place where a lot of people walk through, say hikers and stuff like that. Now in a place like that, those deer are watching. They're watching trails that people walk down. They're close to the trails. They're hidden that they can't see, but they're watching. So it's all situational. It just depends on what they are. But I don't know that any deer really beds just for a wind advantage. Okay, because they're using their ears. If you're hunting in a cattail swamp, for instance, okay, they're going to bed somewhere where they're using their hearing more than anything. Because they can't see very far, just like you, when you walk in there, you can't see. Well, they can't see, so they're not got a sight advantage right there. And it's really not a wind. I mean, they have a wind advantage to whatever direction the wind's coming from, but more than anything, they're using their hearing then. So it just depends on where they're at, the situation, what time of area they're living in, or bedding in. If it's farm country and people are trying to access through fields to get to them, and they know that, then I feel like they're going to bed, in a little clump or somewhere in a low spot where they can see out into the field, okay, with the wind coming over their back and watching towards the field, okay, something like that. Or if it's real thick, they're going to just bed right in the middle of that thicket somewhere, because they're going to hear anything that's coming to them, and they can smell what's ever, upwind of them or whatever.
So with the Cattail Swamps, you said you do a lot of hunting in, and you're saying like that their hearing is what they're relying on a lot of.
Yeah, because of the water and all that. What it takes to get into a cattail swamp. It's noisy getting in there.
Well, that's I guess where I was going with that is how do you go about accessing a cattail swamp to not tip them off, I guess?
Well, most of the places I hunt aren't vast cattail swamps, but I hunt a lot of swamps and beaver dams that have cattails in them or on the edges of them.
Okay.
And a situation like that, I'm thinking of one public place that I hunt. It's a point that comes down into the cattails, and a lot of times there's going to be sign on that point, and they're going to come up that point, when they come out of their bed. Now, if they're bedding in some, say, shrubs or whatever, some little trees that are, way out in there, and there's nothing you can get into, then you have to hunt on the ground. That would be about the only way. And I really don't do that. I like to be in a tree. I just don't feel comfortable hunting on the ground. I know it can be done, but so I would be looking for a certain point or something, that I could get on where they're going to come up, a trail they're going to come up. Look for the sign coming up out of there. A lot of times there'll be scrapes right on that transition right there, so that's what I'd be looking for. Because most of the places I hunt, I specifically look for certain types of places because I hunt what I feel comfortable hunting. Like I hunt what has worked for me in the past. So I hunt a lot of places with creek systems, swamps, beaver dams, and then I know how I can hunt those types of places. So those are the places I look for. When I go out and I drive around in, say, Ohio, or back when I used to hunt in New York all the time, I would drive around and look for that type of terrain, and that's what I would hunt. I don't just randomly go hunt places because I hunt places that I know that work the way my style of hunting, what I'm going to do. That's what I look for. So.
That's a really good approach that I haven't heard anybody use to find peace. Like it's always about like topographical maps and different things like that.
Looking for agriculture, whatever. A lot of people just look for what they think a deer wants, not what fits their hunting style.
Or they hear somebody else on the internet that says, that big bucks only live in swamps, so that's all they do is hunt swamps, or they're all in farm country. So they go after that. Like I've never heard somebody that just targets what they're comfortable hunting and then just or centralize all your attention to that, which makes a lot of sense. I can't believe that I've not heard that before or done that myself.
Got to start. No time like the present.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I would say 85% of my hunting is farmland, just because the way we grew up, with my grandpa's farm, and that's just how we've hunted. So I've never really hunted a swamp at all. But I mean, it's intrigued me, but I've never gotten into it because we just always had the farms to hunt.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a swamp.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that.
Kill a big buck or whatever. I mean, I'm just saying that's the type I like to hunt because it's what works out for me. I like using water to my advantage, as like a barrier, and the nice thing about water access is, I'm not saying accessing down the creek all the time or whatever. I mean, like using waders or whatever. Most people don't want to fiddle around with water. They don't want to cross creeks. They don't want to wear waders. Guys don't, I'm not saying everyone, because there's a lot of, gung-ho hunters nowadays, they listen to all the podcasts and this and that. But, most people don't want to go the extra, step, the extra mile, go through the extra aggravation to get to where they need to be. Then you're hunting public land, especially Pennsylvania, it gets hunted really hard. You can go around some squares and find all kinds of vehicles parked. But if you got water going through there and it's deep enough that you'd have to wear waders or have to use a canoe or you'd have to walk way out of your way a mile to get to it, you're going to be back there by yourself most of the time. You're going to get a couple diehards, that will be in there. But for the most part, that's where you're going to be by yourself. So that's why I like using the water, because it keeps most of the guys between the water and the road,
Makes sense.
But we were talking about betting earlier. There was one quick question. You hear a lot of people talking about doe betting versus buck betting. I can't tell the difference. I don't know. What is the big difference between buck and doe betting?
Truthfully, I think it's all the same. Bucks and the does bed together a lot of time, or in the same area. I wouldn't, not always together, but I have seen it. I mean, I run a lot of trail cameras, and I've had, many times over, especially in the last few years, that I've really started noticing. You'll have bucks and does bed in the exact same bed one day to the next. Okay, and how you can tell the difference between buck and doe when you find the beds. Like if you're scouting, usually does are going to be in a group. There's going to be a couple beds, and you look at the size of the beds. I mean, back when I was young in the 80s and I first started reading about, buck beds and this and that, I would carry around like a tape, a soft tape, and I would tape the beds, see how wide they were from where the elbow went to the back of the rump. And if you got into that 46, 48, 50 something inch, that's usually was going to be a buck, you know what I mean? And the does are going to be smaller, and that they're maybe 38, 42. And then, fawns are going to be tiny, whatever. I mean, that's what I want. I mean, I don't do that anymore, but when I was a kid and I was learning, I used to do that. And it seems like you will find buck beds in the same places that does are going to bed. And, I wouldn't say that younger bucks won't bed in the exact same beds as older bucks do, because mature bucks do, because I've seen that too, and I've got camera pictures to prove it, where I've had multiple mature bucks bed in the exact same bed, and I've had young bucks bed in the same bed. Now, if the big buck comes in there and a young buck's in there, he's going to have to get up out of that bed and move,
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's, if you're looking for a specific place where a doe would be bedded over where a buck would be bedded, I don't know that they look different.
Okay. That's what I thought in my personal experience. That's what I believe. But you hear so many people saying, "Oh, this is buck bedding, this is doe bedding," and I didn't know if there was or was not.
Maybe in other areas of the country there is. I mean, when you look at the Midwest, and a lot of these podcasts come out of the Midwest, a lot of the well-known hunters come out of the Midwest, and out there's way less, good. What do you call cover? You know what I mean? Like there's less thickets, there's less woods, there's less, so there's more ag and there's more open land. And my opinion, being a Pennsylvania guy, I mean, I think that it'd be easier to hunt with less, cover, because where I hunt in all the places, because I put myself in those situations, there's bedding sometimes for 100 acres every direction. There's bedding everywhere. So that's why I use terrain features. I use, low points. I like to hunt low spots, where say, hunting a creek system and a creek runs through, you know what an oxbow in the creek is?
Yeah, where it comes
almost
like a mini peninsula.
Yeah. So an oxbow comes through, and over time, like a meandering creek, which we have a lot around here, meandering creeks have a lot of, switchbacks in them, or oxbows and stuff. And then over time, the water from flooding overflows, and then it cuts a new path for the creek. Okay, so then those old low spots are still sitting there. And if you get a lot of flooding, those will fill up with water. It'll be like dead water. But if they're not, if they're dry, they're hot spots, because the bucks, the does, everything, every deer runs down through the middle of them. They have real good vegetation in them. It's probably more lush to deer. I think they can tell the difference in the minerals. Like sometimes they like a certain oak over another oak tree. Sometimes they like a certain clover or alfalfa field over another one. It might be the way, the mineral content of the plant or whatever. But so I think that they like those areas, because if you look at the soil in something like that, it's that real, like sandy, like black, earth that you want to have in your garden type stuff, So they run those, they put scrapes down through them, and they're staying low. They can move through the property, unseen. I like to hunt, curves, bends and creeks right on the points of them on the opposite side of the water, because that concentrates trails together. So the deer will come down, there'll be a bunch of trails coming through down the creek system, and they'll all usually converge on those points, so that's another good place. And you can access those because on the outside of a creek, where the water, on the a downstream side of a bend in a creek, there's usually a gravel bar, because the water comes off that bank and deposits everything there. So you can usually cross somewhere like that. So if you can find that situation and you cross that water, and it's only, it's not real deep. Now, most guys are hunting there and they're just like, wow, this water's too deep, I can't get across it. But if you know where you can cross it, you cross right there, and then you hunt right where you cross, right on the edge of it. That way you can use thermals to your advantage, for the water. And the deer are going to come. So you haven't left any human scent. There's no ground scent. There's no disturbance of the soil or anything like that. So it's a great setup, and you can even hunt it with the wind blowing almost right down to the buck, but you have an off wind and your wind's just getting enough into that water. So he could be walking with a nose wind, and he's coming right. He can't smell you. You're like bulletproof in a spot like that.
So you're not, just to clarify, you're not talking walking the stream the whole way, but you're saying as soon as you cross over at that where the rocks are set up there.
Somewhere on that bend, like stay right along the edge of that and get up, depending on which way the wind is, and I mean, you could get into we could talk for 3 days about this, but you could, you use your trail camera pictures to find out which way you think the deer is coming from, and then you use that to your advantage, okay, because, especially I hunt a lot of deer that I've known for 2-3 years, you know what I mean? So I know which winds they walk on. I know which winds or which directions they like to walk, because a lot of bucks, they like only, I have certain bucks that I've been getting pictures of for 3 years. They only walk north-south trails. I never get pictures of them going east or west, I mean, and not saying every deer, but I'm just saying they're individuals. Certain deer do certain things. So you just put all that together, and then that's how you, set up accordingly to what you want to do.
So you've mentioned cameras a couple of times. How are you using your cameras? I know you said before we hit record that you were setting up cameras today, but about when, is this the first time you pulled cameras? But I guess what I was getting at, or put out cameras, when do you start putting cameras out, and how are you using them at this time of year to set up for October?
Well, I used to leave my cameras out all year long, and I did that because I feel like if you can find some sort of pattern in a particular buck, that if he'll use it in the summertime, as far as which ways winds he wants to walk on, stuff like that, that he'll use that when it's season. Not particularly, he might not be in that same exact spot anymore, because everything shifts. The food changes, the weather changes, they disperse, they move, and this and that. But if you can find some sort of, pattern, if you find some sort of pattern, then you might be able to use that. But I kind of quit. It's just so much I'm running a lot of cameras. It's a lot to keep up with. I like to write down physically, because I'm old school, so I didn't grow up in the computer era, and so I like to I have figured out how to make files and all that stuff, but I like to write down my particular bucks. I'll give them a name, and then I'll have pages of every photo. I got my daylight photos. I got my rut photos. Gun season, when they move certain times of the year. Summer, this, that. Okay, so that's what I'm using that for. But you were asking me about, I go down a lot of rabbit holes, so
that's okay.
We could be here till midnight. But today I put up, that was the first cameras I've put up this season.
Okay.
Normally I like to get them out, in June. I don't want to get them out any later than the beginning of July. But this time of the year, what I do is, especially the farm country that I'm hunting in Ohio, I went around today. 12 fence posts, 12 trail cameras, and a 10-pound sledge, and just bam, 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 put them in. I put them out on bean fields, and I try to find, the trails in the dirt, because you're looking for tracks coming out into the beans, and I try to cover the fields pretty good, get 3 or 4 cameras, and I'm, sometimes I'm running them right down, say, a fence row, so I can catch the deer that are walking down the fence row, looking for trails that are coming out of them, just using them for inventory this time of the year,
Yeah.
If I was putting, I really don't, I used to, and I've gotten away from it, and I think that it's a good thing. I just don't put cameras out in the woods anymore, in the summertime, because I just feel like it's just too much intrusion. I don't need to do it. I mean, a lot of the deer I'm hunting don't actually live in the places that I'm hunting them. They only come in certain times of the year, and you find that out from data over years, of trail camera pictures. Certain bucks come into your property at certain times of the year. So you're not really hurting them by having it, but I don't even want to bother the does, if I don't have to. So I just don't bother putting the cameras out anymore out in the woods. I'll have a couple on funnels, and I'll just leave them there all summer long, and I'll check them one time or whatever. But the ones on the edges of the fields, I can check them every day if I wanted to, because the farmers are running around. It doesn't bother them, I don't think, other than they see you, but I don't think it's going to kick them out of the whole square. If there's a bachelor group using a bean field and you ride by on your four-wheeler at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and it's 80 degrees out, it's not going to matter. They're still going to come out, So.
Yeah.
You said you took notes on every buck for years to come and everything. How often are you referencing those notes during the season, when you're planning where I'm going to go tonight?
Well, I still haven't. My head still works good enough that I remember I remember most of it, because I'm not. I'm after only a handful of different bucks that I want to shoot. Especially we're talking mostly Ohio when it comes to that. Because in Ohio is where I have a lot of the history with the deer. Like Pennsylvania, I don't go as hard as I do in Ohio. I don't put in that amount of time and cameras and data and all that, because I'm hunting public and mostly they're big, vast places. And I know I'm hunting funnels and pinch points on the public land in PA, so I pretty much know the good funnels and pinch points from scouting and from hunting over the years. And I'm always, looking for new ones and stuff. But I put my cameras out then, on those types of places in, say, September, and I'll start putting them on like licking branches, or if I have some mock scrapes up, or on existing scrapes. But I like to find funnel areas and stuff like that and keep track of, everything, especially the does, because if you know where the does are traveling and you're a rut hunter, like I am mainly a rut, I hunt a lot more in a rut than I do in, say, October, just because you get a couple weeks vacation or 10 days or whatever it is, you want to be there when it's the best chance. You think you're going to have more of a chance to see a deer. Now, a lot of guys kill some nice deer in October, but that's more, getting in tight on bedding and stuff like that. Or you could catch them maybe right when they first start hitting those scrapes in like mid-October, right in the early 20s of October. You can kill them that way, but I like to see deer running around, you know what I mean, chasing each other. So get the whole, full rut experience that way. So that's what I concentrate on the most.
So with in Ohio, you said that's where most of your notes are being taken. Do you take notes on every buck you're seeing? So when a buck blows up to something you're interested in shooting, you have a year or two of data on it, or
no? That's a really good question. And how I do it is when I identify a buck that I want to shoot, or that I think I'm going to want to shoot him, like say he's a 3.5-year-old, okay, then I will definitely start right then and there. Okay. But I will keep a picture. Well, put it this way: say there's a 110-inch 2-year-old running around on the farm I'm hunting in Ohio. I'm going to save every single solitary picture of him, and I'm going to have it in
separate
a folder.
File.
Yeah, so that if he makes it to 4 or 5 or whatever, and that way I know, and then I'll start. Then I'll go back and I'll start writing everything down. And nowadays, with the interweb, you can find out what the what the weather was. It could have been 3 years ago. And yep, exactly. Weather underground. So you don't have to write it all down right there. If it's a deer that you've been watching for a few years, you can wait.
It drive you nuts to every single buck to be writing down.
Man, yeah, because I'm running a lot of cameras because I hunt a lot of properties, so it's a lot to keep track of. When you start talking 50 or 60 cameras, and hundreds of thousands of pictures a year, you're not going to write it all. So yeah.
So my question is, like, you see a lot of 8 points like that. It's just a standard 8 point, 16 inches wide. How do you know that you got a picture of that buck at a 2.5-year-old? How can you then identify, okay, this is him now at 3.5 when they all look it's similar?
It's every time you don't know for sure, you know what I mean? But you just look for, a lot of times if the buck's living in a certain area and you're getting pictures of him on a regular in a certain spot, you can pretty much just conclude it's him. And then as they get older, when you want to shoot them, because say that buck, I don't know how old, but say it's a 2-year-old buck in Ohio. Okay, now when he's 3, I'm going to think, well, he's got kind of short brow tines. It looks like he has a 5th point coming out on the tip, so he might be a 9 point next year. You know what I mean? So if I see a buck that looks like he's an age class older and he has that sort of frame, then I'm going to assume that's him. Now once he's, when you get into where they're 4 or 3 and 4 and 5, and in Ohio, the deer in the area I hunt have a lot of stickers and double brows and split G2s and stuff like that. So it makes it a little bit easier. They're not normally just clean, so you can.
They have some very identifying features.
Yeah, so you can keep track of them pretty good, for the most part.
Yeah, never an exact science.
No.
Now I know, obviously, you have a very good inventory of the whitetails you're hunting. How often do you go into a spot and see a shooter buck that you had no idea about?
Well, it happens every year because they come from they come off other farms, and I think that I don't know for a fact, but my theory is, these bucks, as they get older and they live on the outskirts, say maybe their core area is a mile away or 2 miles away, they'll move into new areas because they're no longer getting the shit kicked out of them.
Right.
So now they can go and hold their own and look for does. And I think that they've been through the farm before when they were younger, and but now they're going to start showing up more often because it's even in Pennsylvania on some of the public land I hunt, but especially over in Northeast Ohio, a lot of the deer that I'm hunting don't live on the farms that I hunt. They're coming from other farms. I wish I would have known this stuff when I was young, because when I was young, I would walk around over there and I'd find this huge sign and I'd be like sitting over top of it and not realizing that the buck lives 4 miles away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But but with trail cameras, I've learned that they move way more than I've known. And I have one area over there that I lost permission on 2 of the farms, but there was 3 farms within like a 4 mile range. And I would get pictures of the big mature bucks on almost every one of them on all 3 farms within a 4 mile radius. And with as much ag as there is and as thick as it is over there, and with as amount of does there is over there, it just makes no sense that those deer move that far, but they just do. I don't, and I see it every year.
Yeah, you'd think they'd have everything they need in this 1 mile radius. What are they doing 4 miles that way?
They just want to breed, And the thing, what I think is, a lot of times these doe groups come into heat at different times. Like a real quick example, and just bring me back to that because I was going to say something else about that. But quick example, like last year on October 3rd, before that, in late September, I found this great big scrape in Ohio, and I put a camera on it, and I didn't check it until way too late, But what I ended up finding out later was on October 3rd, this 170-inch 10-point that I've been getting pictures of since 2017 was chasing a doe around that scrape. He came into the scrape and he was on this doe. And he kept coming. They were around it like almost all day. For 2 days, they were on this scrape, He was on the scrape and these does were in there and they were bedding on this point right off this creek. So there was a beaver swamp on one side and there was a creek on the other, and it was just a finger that came out through. Okay. And then there was a beaver levee crossing right there, and that's where they were crossing back and forth. But he was on her like mad. Now, fast forward turkey season this year, me and my buddies are over there turkey hunting, and we're walking through there, and it was like the first day of turkey season, and there's fawn tracks like this big in the mud right there in the exact same spot where the location where that scrape was. So then when you go back and you count back 200-day gestation period or whatever, it's 201 or whatever, that he probably bred that doe October 3rd. Now, I'm not saying every doe gets bred October 3rd. It's not what I'm trying to say, but I've seen it in the past where these bucks will come on certain times in October and hang out in an area for 2 or 3 days, and it only makes sense that this because a doe group came into heat, so I can't prove it. I don't know if there's any studies out there that show it, but I feel like, if there's does that are going to come in, say October 20th, there's those that are come in October 28th, there's those that are going to come in November 2nd, there's those that are going to come in November 15th, and I think that these bucks over time, these older bucks, learn that. They know where they've gotten lucky before, hey, I'm going to go to that bar, there's lots of chicks there and no guys, that's the type of place, so I try to follow that. I try to put myself in those areas at those time frames, especially if I see it for a couple years in a row, and even if it's not the same buck, because a lot of times it might not be the exact same buck, but if you start seeing mature bucks always showing up on certain scrapes,
there's got to be a reason.
There's a reason why, so at least that's what I think.
Have you found a correlation as to like you find this scrape, it opened up October 31st? I've heard a lot of people say that the next year that scrape will open up within a day or two of October 31st the following year.
I definitely haven't really usually the scrapes open up way earlier than that. But it's a possibility. It's not. I can't say that that's exactly what I would found or whatever. But with whitetail deer, there's no absolutes. There's no every time it's the same thing or whatever. I've seen so much crazy stuff happen with deer. Anything could be the case. I mean, there could be that situation where that happens. But for the most part, I think that a lot of those better scrapes that are closer to bedding, they're in thicker cover, and the better breeding scrapes, or you want to call them, or primary scrape, or whatever people are calling them now. That's somewhere where it's basically like a licking bracket situation. So like those deer are, maybe marking that up, all year long. They're not pawing the ground per se, but they're leaving their scent. It's like a communication place, because I think the best scrapes are somewhere where it's a high traffic area deer wise. So you got does coming through, you got fawns coming through, you got young bucks coming through, and that's why that spot's hot, because for whatever reason they're congregating, and there's something with the terrain or the habitat or whatever that they're coming there. That's where your better scrapes are going to be, because there's scrapes all over the place.
Yeah.
But you could sit on certain scrapes for 2 months straight, and never see a buck that you want to shoot. And then there's other scrapes that you could see 3 in one day. So
I wanted to talk about when you said you hunted, like there's a ton of farms you hunt in Ohio, and with all the data you're taking, if you get like a buck that's say it's a once in a lifetime deer or whatever, or something you're really really interested in, do you ever hone in on just one deer and focus on him for a season? If you have, how do you go about doing that from now until November, whatever?
Yeah, I have, and it's worked a couple times, and it's not worked mostly. But what all you can really do is you just keep track of them through. I mean, now that if it wasn't for trail cameras, I wouldn't even bother trying, probably. Because the places I hunt, like I said, they're real thick. The deer could bed wherever they want. They could be anywhere on the farm bedding. I hear a lot of the stuff people talking about bedding is, they make it sound like it's some sort of specific, has to be this way. And I think people don't understand that they can bed wherever they feel like bedding.
Yeah, they can lay down at any
and they have lots of bedding areas. They don't just bed in one spot. I mean, I've never found a buck that beds in one spot all the time. Now, maybe in Illinois or Iowa or somewhere where there's not a lot of cover or whatever, and it's a lot of ag, maybe they just narrow it down to one spot. But where I hunt at, it ain't like that. They're going to be bedding all over the place. So I would just keep track of their trail camera pictures from year to year. I try to study, where's the best place to be. I had one buck I shot in 2016 that I had been after for a few years, and the way I ended up killing him was I had forgot about a camera. Not forgot about it, actually. I thought it was stolen. I had put out a bunch of cameras. This place was getting pounded by duck hunters, and I kind of was like, I had been watching this buck. I wanted to kill him. And I thought, man, I don't have a chance of killing this buck in daylight, because these duck hunters won't never stop coming into this swamp, So there's no chance he's going to walk in daylight. So I deployed a bunch of cameras just to try to learn about him, and I didn't hunt there really that year. It was in 2015 was the year I didn't really hunt him that much. I was in there a few times early season, but and actually could have had a shot him on the first day of archery, but he was just a little out of range. I don't shoot far. I don't like to shoot far, So he was too far. Most, some of these guys, they would have shot him. He was like 40 yards. I just don't do that. But anyhow, that buck, when I gathered all my cameras, I didn't really have any pictures of them on the cameras that I gathered. I can't remember how many I put in there. It might have been 5 or something on the whole farm. It was like a 120 acre farm. I had one camera that I put down on a transition in the swamp. And when I went in there to take the camera, since I hadn't been here since I put it up, which was in like September or whatever, I couldn't find a thing. I thought someone stole it, because there's other people that hunt the farm too. I'm not, it's not exclusive rights or nothing like that. So I was back there again, like deer and turkey season, and I'm walking around trying to get around on this bird, and I'm like, oh, that's my camera. So I grabbed the camera, and I was, it's like, oh, it's Christmas morning, I'm going to go home and look at this card. It sat there all year long, it's got everything on it. And when I go through the data on the camera, that buck in particular, I called the buck Super Freak, which is stupid, but my kids called it. It doesn't really matter. He had 2 drop tines on his left side. One of them ended up breaking off before I shot him. But he had walked that trail 3 times in November from it was the 6th to the 12th. He daylighted 3 times on that trail with all the duck hunting pressure and everything. So I'm just like,
that camped there for a week.
Yeah. So just as luck would have it, there was like a feeder creek that ran down into this spot, which is this transition along a swamp, So how a swamp will be like real wet, and then you'll get like that yellow grass, and then you'll start getting like dogwood and high stem count saplings and stuff like that, and then it starts coming up into more like hardwood timber and stuff. Right on that is where I was, where the trail was actually
Right where
just
the hardwood starts? is
just
what you're saying?
down from it, yeah, just inside. And so there was a patch of cover that was real thick from when they logged it out years before that was right behind that spot. So there was a finger creek that went down into that swamp. So I could walk down that creek and never touch the ground, basically, to get to that stand. So I started hunting November 4th, and the first day I hunted it, I had 2 does come through, a doe and a fawn come through, and they bedded in that tiny little patch right behind me. It was like an acre, maybe, of thicket. And they bedded there, and then a 9-point, like 130-inch 9, come down through, and he was ripping up a tree, and I grunted at him, and he walked over and he stood under me, and I had to just, close my eyes and look at the ground and pray that I wouldn't pick my bow up, and so I did. So I didn't shoot him, and I'd let him go, and so then on the 7th, I had that buck, the target buck, come down. It wasn't that exact trail, but he came down through there right first thing in the morning, and I tried to grunt him over. He didn't want nothing to do with it. He acted like he didn't even hear it, actually. He was on a mission, and he went down, but he walked past a particular tree. I noticed where he went into this thicket to go on to the next property. So then on the 9th, I hear something behind me. I went there every day from the 4th. Now the 9th, it'd been like the 5th day I hunted that stand, because it was, luckily I had a consistent wind. It was a northwest wind every day, and I could walk down in there and nothing knew it was there. The 9th, I hear something. There's a doe behind me walking. I'm assuming it was the same doe I saw on the 4th. I had seen her a couple times in those 5-day period, and she come up out of the swamp, and that buck was right on her tail, and he's following her. So I ended up grunting him up to me, or snort wheezing him up to me. And right when he was coming into my shooting lane, he was like 10 yards, and it had been raining that morning. And when I drew back, that slide on your like, it made like a little squeak, and he looked right up at me, and he saw me, and he took a couple bounds, but he walked over to that doe. She was laying there at the time, and he like got her up, and they walked off, and they walked right past that same tree again. So then I went back there on the 14th and went in there with my lone wolf and set it up in that cherry tree, and ended up shooting that buck. I had 140-inch and 130-inch buck in there that same day, chasing a doe around, and then him, and I shot him. So
That's wild.
it has worked out a few times. I've shot a couple that I was actually trying to kill. So
Was the first spot you had where you were hunting for 5 days, was that a preset that you had sitting there, or were you carrying your stand in each time?
that was I preset that stand because I planned on coming back to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you just left it there, and then
Yep, and then I left it there, and then the day I ended up shooting him, I went in with my alpha, and I climbed up in that tree. And the funny thing is, this is the first buck that came through was like a 140-inch 10 that I had known very well. And I wanted to shoot him, I mean, I wasn't going to pass that deer up. And he walked right under the tree I was in for the first 5 days. He walked right
Really?
underneath. Yeah. And I tried to run him over, and he was chasing the doe around, and he started and I think that's how I ended up killing this buck, is because he was chasing the doe. I tried to call to him. I'm not big on calling, but if they're not coming to me, what do I got to lose on November 14th,
Yeah.
And he was chasing the doe. I called to him. He didn't care. Another buck, the 8-point, come walking down the transition following a fawn. She went into the cattails, and I heard this buck, the buck that I shot, coming through the cattails. He was straight downwind of me, but there was a high pressure. I float milkweed all the time, and I seen it was going straight up. The water was probably warm enough that it was pulling that. And when that doe fawn went into them cattails, he exploded through there and started chasing her all through there, and they both wound up underneath my tree. I just luck would have it, I shot him. So
Interesting. So kind of to piggyback on that, you were talking before we hit record, like when you're going after a buck, or not even a specific buck, you're hunting an area, you talked about like picking a specific spot inside your spot, and you kind of talked a little bit about certain areas that you like to go with, like switchbacks and cricks and stuff, but how do you go about picking that spot on a spot in your setups?
Well, what I do is I just look for the thicker stuff along. Like that was a scouting video I had put on the YouTube channel that I used to put stuff on, but I don't do it anymore because I'm not a techie. But and that area, when you look at it, it just all looks good because there's deer trails everywhere. I mean, there's legit deer trails going everywhere through there, and there's bedding all through there. But the thickest stuff right along the edge of the creek seems to be where them bucks will walk through. So they don't want to really expose themselves if they don't have to, especially that was a public land hunt in Pennsylvania. So, those deer know people, So they're staying, the mature bucks are going to stay in the thicker stuff. And that was basically what I look for is, if there's a bunch of trails, don't pick. And I shouldn't say don't pick it because anything can happen, but I try not to pick the trails that are in the more open stuff. You could walk into it, and like when I was, 25, I might have been like, oh, that trail looks really good. I mean, I don't have to cut any shooting lanes. Well, because and then I would have been like, man, I could have shot that buck if I would have been 15 yards that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That type of thing. Seems like they come through the thicker stuff. So that's what I was getting at right there.
So with those heavy trails that you're finding, like in really thick stuff, have you found any trails that like a bigger deer isn't going through because it's too thick, or will they always kind of, or not always, like anything can work, but there's on the one property we hunt up in like upstate New York, the one pond property has some, serious, I think it's like dogwood or something, and I look at it and be like, there's no way a deer with a large rack could get through that. But there's deer tracks on it, but
you make a good point. But the thing of it is they still seem to go through that thick stuff.
Okay.
I've actually shot a buck one time that come running down through a transition on a swamp, turning his head sideways as he was running, going through the trees.
Okay.
So
that answered my question.
They'll figure a way to get through it if they want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Tom knows the piece I'm talking about. When you're walking in, we stay on the edge of it when we're walking in, which probably now talking to you probably isn't the best idea, but it's just looking into it. It's like, to me, I'm like, there's no way like a mature deer could bust through that, but there's always big tracks on there.
Mature bucks hang in pretty thick stuff, so they're going to find a way through it. Now, maybe they're bedding right on the edge of it, maybe they're traveling the edge of it more than we know. We can't always be there to find out because they can't just lay just inside. Like if you even like when you got say a clear cut or something. A lot of times they'll bed right in the middle of the clear cut, and a lot of times they'll bed right on the edge of the clear cut. You know what I mean? It's hard to say, but I've seen some real thick, nasty stuff, and the mature bucks don't seem to have any problem getting through. Like the farms I hunt in Ohio, over there, it's not as bad here. Some places it is, but that multiflora rose over there.
Oh yeah.
It's literally like walls in some places, but they still go through it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They'll just the does will make trails down through it, and I think that maybe that's the only time that the buck is going through there. But he will go through that stuff. He's not going to just walk around and avoid thick cover so he can have an easier day at it, or what I mean, unless he's going to just wait till it gets totally dark out and he feels like he has no threat or whatever. But
now, do you ever venture and hunt in the thicket right in the bedding, or do you typically stay in the transition areas on the edge of bedding?
I would say I stay more along the transition, but I have hunted in thick bedding areas before. Yeah, definitely.
What's caused you to stay more towards the transitions?
It just seems like that's what deer like edge. They're edge creatures, and it seems like that they travel the edge. And the more different types of habitat that come together seems to be the better. Say you got water, thicket, open woods, or you got apple trees, thicket, creek, whatever, something like that, or ag field.
The most diverse area.
Yeah.
So going back to your spot within a spot then, so if you've got, say, 3 different transition, like you said, apples, creek, thicket, so that's the spot, that general area where they all come together. Now, where are you typically setting up within that spot?
Well, it depends on what you have available. Put it for a tree stand and all that. But I like to hunt right by an apple tree because, especially in October, those bucks seem to get up out of them beds and come over to the apples. And there's a lot of times there's really good scrapes under there. Those are like staging areas, you'd call it or whatever. So I do like to get in. If there's apple trees around, I'm gonna hunt by the apple tree because that's like a secondary food source. It's not the destination food source, but it's the first place they might go to right when they come out of the bed. They're probably going to be bedded close to it, and probably somewhere it might be, if it's thick enough, then you can get in there close and, hopefully they're there with a just trying to hear what's sneaking up on them, or smelling what's behind them, whatever, and they can't see you. Usually when it's, a lot of the old apple orchards that I hunt, it's used to be a cow pasture at one time, probably 70 years ago.
That's
or whatever.
Exactly
You know what I mean?
Is, I'm pretty sure.
So,
yeah, because the one piece that we hunt, Frank's got a stand. It's an old apple orchard, and you can actually, there's still some old fence posts, and most of them have rotted out completely, but there's just a few of them. And they there's the one I think it's probably the oldest apple tree there. It's almost always filled with scrapes. The 360 degrees.
I've seen them all the way around them in a circle before, like that. Yeah, that's a hot spot. If you can get in there, and if you're hunting a spot like that, and you're not, put it this way, do you guys put cameras on that?
Yeah.
Do you get pictures of mature bucks on that?
Not really mature bucks. So I guess to give you a backstory on this piece, my grandpa had it back in the 80s, didn't really do anything with it. My dad had it, didn't really do anything with it. When Tom and I got old enough to start driving up there, Frank joined us, and we would go up there and hunt. And my dad and my grandpa told us, you're kind of wasting your time. The Amish have pretty much run it over. They shoot everything that's on there. And over time, we've been getting rid of Amish people hunting on it, trespassers, and then...
I feel your pain.
Because basically for 20 years, it was essentially state game land.
Okay.
Because the owners, my grandpa, or later my dad, they never hunted it, and they knew the owners were from out of town, so it was free range.
But
I feel like sometimes deer learn through behavior, over time, like their mothers, even when they're from the time they're little, or just to stay out of certain areas because of that. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but it could be that
very
happened.
well could be.
And I also noticed that sometimes old cow pastures are great places to hunt because a lot of different grasses and stuff grow up in them. A lot of times there's different, you got hawthorn, you got cherries, you got all kinds of stuff in there that they could eat, apples and stuff like that. But I think it might take a little bit of time till the deer get used to being in there all the time, because when there's a herd of cows in there all the time, the deer don't really want to be around that. The cows eat everything up and it gets kind of open. And then after they're gone for I think sometimes it might take a couple years till those deer start using it. But it sounds like it's been a while since you had any cattle in there.
It makes sense that you say something, along those lines, because we would see a lot of, not big deer, just because of where we're at, but big for the area. We'd see some nice bucks in the summertime, but then as soon as archery rolled around, right after the first 2 weeks of October, it seemed like that property just vacated. And we wouldn't even hunt it that much because we're almost an hour away. We'd hunt it on the weekends or whatever, but it would just completely vacate, and we wouldn't see anything. But we've been working on it for several years, and slowly we've been holding deer longer and longer through the season.
How much property do you guys have there?
116 acres.
So you should be able to hold at least one good buck in there to keep for a core area.
That's pretty much what we were starting to get to. So last year was the first year that we had multiple bucks staying on the property through December, January. And Tom actually killed for the area a really nice buck, really tall 9. And then my dad killed a pretty good 8 in rifle season. That was the first year we ever killed 2 decent bucks in the same season that late into the year.
Yeah, it sounds like you're answering your own question. Is that it was game on for everyone in the neighborhood.
It took almost 10 years.
And it takes a long time, because I run into that in Ohio too. We get people, I hate to say Amish, because I know Amish people listen to podcasts too. But they, maybe in other states they don't trespass like mad, but in Pennsylvania they're everywhere. They shoot deer all year, and they're always on your property. So, it gets to be really frustrating. And I find the same thing in Northeast Ohio, that we have to constantly go to their house. I mean, I've had to literally tell them that you can't walk on my property without me getting a picture of you. I mean, we have to put out tons of cameras. Just a lot of them are up in trees, just so we're trying to find out who's walking around on the property. Because they just keep
time
coming.
and money on producing a habitat, or tracking these deer. You don't want somebody else is their intrusions to screw that up.
Well, the worst part of it is they all own their own 100 and something acres right next to it. So like, stay over there. You know, I don't go on your land. So you know what I mean. But yeah, it's frustrating. But what we just keep going at it, and keep going over there and talking to them. And knock on wood, the last 2 years they haven't been around. So at least if they did, they're ninja style, and they're turning invisible and stuff. But they've been staying out there. You just have to keep up with it because
the
It
first
took
two,
us, 4 or 5 years to really get a handle on it?
Yeah, the first 2 years, every single time we pulled up, because at the time we didn't have any cabin or anything up there, so we drive every morning to go hunt there. And then for the first 2 years, every time I pulled up to that property, I had to kick somebody off. There was somebody getting their boots on by the truck, and I had been told every excuse of, I'm so-and-so's nephew, they're Todd's kid, which is who I am. It's like, so it took a long time, and like I said, we're coming on 10 years working with building habitat. We did a lot of hinge cuts,
Planted thousands of trees.
Yeah,
And here's the other thing to think about: if that apple tree has scrapes around it in a circle like that, chances are that they were probably hunting right there. They probably found that sign too.
Yeah.
Especially
Actually,
are
the
there
guy told us
are
he
there
used to hunt
apples? Are there apples all over the place,
Oh,
or is
yeah.
that
There's
okay.
like the whole, I guess would it be the west side of the property, like almost the whole length is apples. Like probably
so it might have
300.
been they were pounding the apple orchard for a long time, and it just took a while for the deer to get out of there. But you'd think you'd still be getting pictures of the buck that he shot and your grandpa shot. Did you guys have any pictures of that deer in there?
The buck Tom killed last year.
He didn't show up on camera until November 9th, and I shot him on the 13th.
Okay.
And then my dad's, we only had a couple pictures in September, and he shot him the opening weekend in
So it
December.
sounds like they're coming off of other farms where there's their
it's
core
a big
area.
square,
Yeah.
and it's all ag around us. So I think it's like I don't think there's a lot of bucks that that's the core area, but it's definitely used as a travel piece.
Well, it could be because of the old pressure, and it could not be. I mean, like even the one farm I hunt in Ohio, it's 500 acres. We have 250 acres on each side of the road, and not a lot of bucks live on that farm. You'll have and what stinks is like you let one go for a few years, and then it ends up disappearing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's tough. I don't know why it would be, because like over there you got beans one year in one field, corn in the other field. They're switching it year to year. They got everything they need. The guy makes hay, so there's clover and alfalfa. There's white oaks everywhere, swamp white oaks all over the creek bottoms, and there's red oaks on the one side of the road throughout the whole place. So there's everything a deer would ever want, but there's not usually a mature buck living right in there. He's on the other, they come from other places most of the time. They're not in there all year long for whatever reason. I can't explain it. And it's not from pressure from us that are hunting it. Now, maybe it's from farming activities, but I wouldn't think that would matter. They should be used to that by now over the
you'd
years.
think.
So, I can't explain why. It's just some areas they just want to be there, and some areas they don't. Hard to tell why.
No, I'm kind of feeling like you don't really look at that as a disadvantage that they're living there, do you? Like it.
No,
That's, I guess, the way you were talking about it. Sounds like it's not really a disadvantage that they don't live there, because you only need them there the day you're hunting them.
Especially
really.
because, like I said, I've always concentrated most of my time in the rut. So in the rut, I know they're going to come through there because we have a lot of does and we have the food and all that stuff. So that's what keeps the does there. That's why I like, like when it comes to trail cameras, you asked before, like most guys and friends of mine in the past that, be like, oh, doe, like, oh, big deal. They only care about the buck pictures. You got to care about your doe pictures. You got to keep track of where your doe coming from. What direction are they traveling? Where are they bedding at? If you're going to hunt the rut, you want to know where the does are going to be. You want to know. That's why I like to find funnels that does move through and that they're bedding on one side or the other of the funnel. You know what I mean? So, and the funnel doesn't have to be, you look at it and it looks like an hourglass from the air or whatever. I mean, I'm talking, there's funnels inside of, unbroken timber. You know what I mean? All over. You just got to put your boots on the ground. You got to find them. It could be a tree blew over and they're walking around and there happens to be some dead water on the other side of it and it's 40 yards wide. That's a funnel to me. You know what I mean? It's like funnels look like lots of different things.
Like just little dips, like on the edge of gullies. There are a lot of times we get on the two of the pieces we hunt. There's a big gully that runs through, and any little just swale that drops, so they can kind of get out of like the line of sight.
Yeah.
That seems to like funnel deer pretty heavily.
Definitely. That sounds like a good spot too.
You're the first person I've ever heard talk about does on trail cameras, because I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah,
I kind of
click through them as fast as I
we're
can.
all
like
guilty.
doe.
Yeah,
Who cares?
well-
But that's an interesting point you make. We've
It
talked
makes
to quite a
sense.
few people about how they use trail cameras, and you're the first person to mention paying attention closely to doe activity.
Yeah, because if you're watching the doe pictures and paying something, now I'm not writing down doe pictures like I
Yeah.
am, a buck that's 5.5 years old, but I am paying attention to what
Yeah.
direction you're moving because, does are more predictable than bucks, especially in November. Like a mature buck, he might be on the farm you're hunting today, tomorrow, and then the next day he could be 3 miles away,
Yeah.
Whereas those does, as long as nothing changed with the food, they're going to be
They're
there, So that's why, like, in order of importance, when it comes to hunting, food, know the food sources. Because even when the bucks aren't worried about food, the does are. You know what I mean? So like early in the season, early October, the bucks are putting on the feed bag. They're gobbling up everything they can because they got to fatten up and get ready for the rut. You know what I mean? And for the winter time because they're going to get run down. And then during say latter part of October, they're not so much worried about feeding like they were earlier in October and September or August and July, whatever. They might be off. They're not really worried about the food source as much, but the does are still always worried about the food source. I mean,
Yeah.
that's their whole,
Yeah,
all they
their
wanna
brain
do-
isn't wired for
They
the
want to
rut.
raise their fawns and breed. That's what they're there to do. That's their job. And the buck's job is to breed, and he has to go look for does to do that, or hang out where there's does at. So if you're hunting around does in the rut, you should be hunting around bucks.
Yeah.
So I got another question pertaining to does that a lot of the older people that I respect and listen to for advice with hunting believe that it's not a good idea to shoot does on the property earlier in the season. What's your take on shooting does during hunting? I mean, just shoot. What's your take on shooting does?
I shoot does, but I don't shoot them in October or November, early November or mid-November or whatever. It's going to be late season or whatever. I used to, like when I was younger, it was all about killing stuff.
Yeah.
I had to kill deer because everybody was trying to kill deer, and if you wanted to be a deer hunter, you had to kill deer. So I was hunting Ohio, New York, and PA, and I was trying to fill all my tags. Back then I would shoot the first buck I saw in Pennsylvania, the first buck I saw in New York, and then I'd try to shoot a big buck in Ohio. But I'd shoot does. Like I remember years where I'd have 3 or 4 does shot by the first week of October, between Pennsylvania and Ohio. Because Ohio, they always give you 2, 3, 4 tags. I mean, didn't give them to you, but, So I used to do that. And then I started figuring out over time that these does that I'm I wasn't really targeting them, but I was hunting
them, yeah.
and I was taking them,
them,
and that's, and the thing of it is I've killed a handful of nice bucks in early October. And since my children were born, I haven't really hunted October much because, they play football and I got them into hunting. So I'm concentrating. They're fair weather. They don't want to be out in gun season so much. They don't want to be out in the dead of the rut or whatever, hunting, in the cold. So I take them in early October. So like the last, say, 6-7 years, I haven't really gotten to hunt October that much between football and taking the kids hunting. And then back when I used to hunt October a lot, when I was able to, I was shooting every freaking deer I saw, legally. But I'm just saying, no, I mean, seriously.
Yeah,
but so I wasn't even taking the time to wait for a mature buck. I was setting up on a food source in a thicket just like I do now. But I was shooting a doe. She came out and, who knows? There could have been a buck coming. There could have been a buck bedded within earshot of my bow. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I just learned. It just took a few years, and I learned. I just leave my does go. When I started figuring out that these does bed in the same spots a lot of times, and I could use that to my advantage, I quit shooting does in October. So that's a long answer to.
No, that's I always wondered because like my grandpa won't shoot does at all. Like he believes that you don't shoot does.
That's old school PA hunting right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that used to be what a lot of people said for years back in the day, that in fact, I still have friends that, they have big farms out by my house and they've never shot a doe on their property. In fact, one time we brought a youth hunter this was like 20 years ago, to their farm, and when they first started that youth doe with a gun. I mean, this is like 20 years ago, and we brought a girl, my buddy's daughter, and she shot a doe, and when the one brother found out about it, he freaking lost his mind. There's one doe. I mean, there's probably 100 of them in that square,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it used to be. A lot of people didn't shoot does.
So you think it's? I mean, not. You agree with shooting does, but
Just pick the
later
time.
in the season.
Yeah, oh no, I shoot does, and I encourage my kids to shoot does, and I will let them shoot a doe in early season because I just feel like when they're little, they need to experience the hunt, and I don't make them hold out. I tell them we're going hunting, and if a deer comes in, you're going to shoot it because that's what they want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we don't. Some guys they're tough on their kids, and they're just like, well, you've got to shoot. We're going to let him go today, bud. We'll wait for a bigger one. No, I just don't believe in that. When they're young, they can make those decisions when they get older.
Yeah, I
my
agree.
dad did the same thing for us. Our first bucks. I mean, Tom got. I think his was a 3-point. Mine was a 3-point. Like we all shot little bucks getting started, and it wasn't until after we started hunting by ourselves that we started setting our own standards. From that which I appreciate the way my dad did that for us because I'd hate to. I was so excited. When I shot my first buck, I can't imagine being that excited and then him saying like, "Nope, can't shoot that one." Like it would
exactly.
it could totally ruin your.
Yeah, we want to keep
love
them
for it.
interested, and I find that
exactly.
it seems like with my children anyway, that when they have success or when they see deer, they're interested to keep going. But the days when we sit and not see anything, then they're just like, can we go?
Test the patience
something
a
like
little
that,
bit.
and so I got one of them that's really gung ho about it, and the other one that he's like, but they both shot like 6 or 7. I think the one might have shot 8, but deer already each, and they're 12 and 14. So.
Wow.
I started them off with the Menard thing and got them into it young, and I put a lot of time into that in October time frame because it's the best weather and the deer are usually moving pretty good that time of year. They're hitting food sources. I have a couple food plots on my property. Me and my boys put in, and we set up on those. And I don't hunt them; it's just for the kids, So that's why I'm hunting October. That's what I'm doing in my October is taking the kids out.
Would you ever hunt a mature buck on a food plot? Have you had success doing that? Or?
No, I mean, I'm not. I mean, I know people do it, but I only own 20 acres. So, I did have a buck that I wanted to kill that was using that food plot through the summer a couple years ago. And September 19th they disappeared. And I still remember to this day. And I never did get another picture of him or anything. He quit coming there. So, but, I hunted there in the late season one time. And it would have been like January 1st, I believe it was. And I went in there with a doe tag trying to shoot a doe myself because the kids didn't want to go. And it was like literally like 6 degrees below zero that day. And don't you know that when I had 3 or 4 does come in and I'm getting ready to shoot and this big massive 8-point comes in and he starts chasing all the does around. And it was like January 1st. And the only deer that I had a shot at was that buck, and I'd already killed my buck. So
That's the way it goes.
yeah, he was like a 4-year-old. So yeah, it was kind of depressing, but it was good. It was a good experience, but never did get a doe that day.
Have any of your kids showed an interest in hunting as hard as you do and doing like all of the extra work to get bigger deer? Or are they still just sticking to the early season stuff?
Not yet. I mean, when they were little, I used to carry them around to check cameras and all that stuff, and both of them. And for years it was a pain because they were too small to walk through the thickets, and I had to carry them across creeks and all that. And I might have gotten them, maybe not. It might have been a bad idea for me to do that kind of stuff. But they still come with me to Ohio, to check cameras in the summer. But that's usually just riding around on a 4-wheeler on the edges of bean fields, checking cards, and then they get to have Dairy Queen and Taco Bell. So, I think they're there for the Dairy Queen and the Taco Bell over
Can't
everything
pass
else.
that up.
Yeah, so
You gotta bait them somehow.
exactly.
So I remember when I was young, my Uncle John would take us, and it was like ritual. If you hunted with my Uncle John, you were getting McDonald's after it.
Yeah, that's a good reason to go.
But before we wrap things up here, I did want to talk about just a little bit of the gear that you use throughout the year. And is there any, there's a ton of stuff out there.
Yeah,
but
Nick's a big gear nut.
I enjoy trying. I buy and sell like crazy. Like, I was just curious if there's any gear that you use that you've been using for a long time that you feel really helps with your success.
Yeah, well, number one is right now I use Lone Wolf custom gear stands. I love them. They're light, quiet setup, solid as a rock,
So
I've
well
been
thought out too. This
well thought out.
Sold us on them.
Very, 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 very good stands, and there's a lot of functionality to them. You know what I mean? So they've just got all kinds of features that most stands don't have. But like the guy who started the company, Andre D'Acquisto, I think he started in 1984.
84, yeah, 84.
84, yeah.
And when he started with those cast aluminum stands, like he revolutionized hunting, because when I first started hunting, I was using a Warren Sweet climber. I never had heard of Lone Wolf. This was 86. And it was,
Is that similar to like the Bakers?
Yeah, something like that. They had like metal the part that went around the tree and the platform and the seat was wood, and it was like an angle. In fact, when I shot that first buck in Pennsylvania in 87, my first buck on that, I think it was the first day of archery, I was sitting down when he came in, and when I shot him, I stood up and the seat fell straight down and banged, I mean, because it was just like not good. And then I went to what are they called? Lock-ons. And I started
Windwalkers and spirits.
I started. Well, I started buying I was hunting all over. I was hunting New York, Ohio, PA. So I had like 20 of them, and I had them all over the place. And then they came out with the ones that had the rope on them. And then I was like, wow, I can carry these in. Back then you used pegs. You didn't have really sticks. No one had. I mean, obviously Lone Wolf had that stuff, but I had never heard it, never seen it. And then sometime in the 90s. When I heard about Lone Wolf and I started using, their stuff, and ever since then, I mean, they're responsible for the death of millions of deer in this country, probably.
Yeah,
in the United
that's
States.
a fact.
And most I shouldn't say most, but a big majority of the deer I've killed have been out of a Lone Wolf stand or now the Lone Wolf Custom. But last year I shot both of my deer. I shot last year out of my old school climber, the hand climber. That's like 20 years old. In certain situations, if I don't like heights. And so in certain situations, if I want to go higher, I feel more comfortable going higher in a climber for whatever reason.
Even
I don't know.
with
It doesn't
hand
make
climber,
any.
you still.
I feel more comfortable using a climber to go higher. So that's what I'll use if I'm going to go up a little bit higher. But I like to hunt low. I used to go like 8-10 pegs high back in the day, in the early 90s. So that would get you 18 or 20 foot or whatever it was. And my brother Brian, who's also a good archery hunter, he would always, I'd go up to his stand, he'd shoot a buck and he'd say, hey, I shot a buck, come help me. So I'd go there and I'd be like, where was he at? And he's like, oh, my stand's right there. And I'd look up and I'd be like,
You could grab
7
the
feet
platform.
off the
literally
ground.
grab the bottom of his stand every time because he was so scared of heights. He would literally sit up there and hug the tree. You know what I mean? But he always shot deer and he always shot nice bucks. He shot several nice bucks in Ohio back in the 90s, early 2000s, whatever. And he was hunting low. And I started thinking, man, I don't got to be that high up in a tree. If Brian, and I asked him, what are you doing? How are you getting these deer? He'd be like, yeah, there were 6 doe here and the buck come this way. And, I'm like, how did they know I see? He's like, I don't move.
Mm-hmm. That's the best camouflage.
Yeah, maybe if I don't move, it'd be a good thing. So yeah, so I don't like going real high. I don't like to have to put tons of sticks up. I don't like to have to go up and down the tree. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I just use a couple sticks. Most of the time it's 2 or 3 is all I'm going. But that's what I like about the Lone Wolf is they're light. You can get in and out. You can walk long distances. It doesn't feel like you're carrying anything. So
yeah, they're so packable and small. When you're like dipping through brush or whatever, it's not catching the stand.
Now the older ones were kind of heavy, and they kicked my butt a few times, more than a few times. That's what another thing that I liked about the climber back then is it was lighter than carrying the sticks in the Alpha. But with the 1.0 is what I'm running right now. And with that stand, I really barely know what's on there. And then the feature where it clips in and you can use it kind of like put your backpack
frame,
on.
yeah.
I mean, that's what sold me when I seen that. I was like, oh, I got to have one of those. You know? So I love it. Yeah.
I remember the first year that they were down at Harrisburg, Frank and I headed down there, and I remember, I had seen some things on Instagram and stuff about them coming back with Lone Wolf custom gear, and Frank and I were both kind of baffled by the price at first, and we got down there and we got our hands on one, actually held it, put it on our backs and stuff. And as we walked away, we both looked at each other like
we're buying it.
Sold.
Yeah,
for us, all it took was actually getting our hands on it and seeing all the, like they said, the features, the feather weight of it. That's what sold us instantly.
The main thing about them is they're rock solid. And here's the thing. I would pay that price to have back the 5 or 6 deer that were 140 to 170 in my life that I could have shot that were right there. And when I shifted my weight, made a noise, because I had that happen. I mean, everyone has stories of the ones that got away. I got a lot of stories of ones that got away, so, until I started using stuff that was solid, you know what I mean? So
that makes all the difference.
The price, I mean, if you're going to put it this way, even it wasn't always this way, but look at the price of fuel right now. If you're going to drive, somewhere and, put all this money into all this equipment, you want to have equipment that's going to not fail you.
Yeah,
when
it
the time
has to
comes,
function when you need it to.
When you put as much time as you do into hunting, and getting a mature buck each year, is it worth, saving a little bit of money and having the stand pop when it's crucial?
Yeah,
when you go to stand up and it creaks or something.
I mean, you're buying cameras, you're buying cards, you're buying batteries, you're driving, you're buying camouflage, you're buying expensive bows and arrows, and everything's expensive anymore. I mean, just 3 I use the K2s, what's it called? Afflictor K2s, and those things ain't cheap. I mean, nothing is cheap anymore. So you can't expect to get a stand for $100 and it's going to be solid.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been working in the metal industry for a while, and people think that they're trying to they're producing it for $150 and jacking the price way up. But if you knew the price of aluminum and the price it costs to water jet something, they really aren't doing a horrible job on their pricing.
No,
and they're worth it for sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, is there any things you wanted to talk about tonight that we didn't get to, or?
No, nothing in particular. I mean, we covered a lot of stuff. If you have any other questions you want, I mean, fire away. It's fine with me.
That was a lot for me to take in, and you're at a higher level than I am for whitetail. That's why I enjoyed
that.
I mean,
I just hunt a lot, and I'm old.
But I guess for me, you got way more experience, so listening to the way you think about things is really interesting. So it's a lot for me to take in. I've got about all I can, all the questions I wanted to ask. Good. I got to, but it opens up 50 more. You say one thing that I asked a question, you answer it, and then it's oh well, now I have 3 other things.
One thing I would say, and I said this when I was on with Bo Martonic not too long ago, and he said, "Is there anything you want to add or whatever?" So I'll say this: I've tried to mentor a lot of younger guys over the years, and they've turned into really good hunters. One thing I see that's a problem with hunting is trail cameras can be your best friend; they could be your worst enemy. So just don't rely on trail cameras only to hunt. Okay, you have to scout. You've got to read sign and use those pictures to put you in the, you have to put everything together, the piece of the puzzle. If you chase trail camera pictures, you're never going to kill the buck that you want to kill.
Yeah, you'll always be a day behind.
Because I know guys that they'll get out of their stand on November 2nd and check all their cameras at 9:00 in the morning. And I mean, not saying that can't be a tactic, because I guess it could be. But it's not a tactic I want to use. I want to be hunting when the deer are moving. I've shot a lot of my deer between 9 and 1 or 2, during the rut. So, and the other thing is, unless you got a cell camera sitting on, say, a scrape, and you know that buck's going to walk to the next scrape 150 yards away, and you've got time to run over there and set a stand up or whatever, what good is it going to do you knowing that picture was taken this instant? You know, it's just a part of a puzzle, you know? So I'd say to the younger guys that, you know, spend some time looking at the ground, you know, find big tracks don't lie, you know, put the sign together and use the cameras with that to
It's like
try
a
to kill a
supplement
big buck.
to it, but don't
Yeah.
put all your eggs in that basket.
Exactly.
That does bring up one question I have. So,
No problem.
That's literally how I felt all night. It's like, okay, so now
so when you're spending time in the summer scouting, you know, on the edges of bedding areas and stuff, what are you doing to not educate the bucks that you're trying to go in there and hunt?
Well, that's the thing is in the summer I don't scout in like at bedding areas or anything like that.
So when
unless like I'm kind of lied about that because I started hunting Allegheny. Well, I'm going to start hunting Allegheny National Forest because I've been intrigued by these guys that are shooting some really good bucks down in the mountains. I don't know if you guys follow Steve Shirk.
Oh yeah, Shirk's
yeah.
Guide Service.
Yes, yeah, and that guy is like a wealth of information, and the bucks that they're pulling out of the mountains. You know, back in the day when I was a kid, you know,
Those look like Midwest whitetails.
you went to the Allegheny National Forest to go to somebody's hunting camp and drink beer for the whole weekend, and then drive back to Crawford County and hunt the first day of buck because you didn't want to be down there because it was an army of orange and it was all spikes, you know. But nowadays there's some huge bucks. So yeah, I have been scouting. You know, concentrating lately on Allegheny National Forest. So I have been scouted, but I don't know that I'm going to actually hunt there this year. That's the thing. So I'm just trying to learn it right now. I got started a little bit late, but I usually don't go I try not to go into the woods in the summertime that much. You know, like I said, that's one of my strategy for cameras in the summer is
Less
along
invasive.
the edge, along the edge of fields. I might have a few cameras that I set during turkey season in a funnel or something, you know, but that's just to keep track of, you know, deer movement. But you're going to get inventory of bucks. That's what you should be doing in the summertime is just using those pictures for inventory purposes. And you're going to get that on beans and alfalfa and stuff like that, you know. Then you transition your cameras as you go. So whenever their velvet starts peeling, those deer are going to move. They're going to change. Those beans defoliate, and they're going to start. Then the white oaks start dropping, and then they're going to start hitting scrapes. So you got to boom, 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 move your cameras like that. Well, that's what I do, you know, and then try to stay with it like that. Keep track of them. But you should have your inventory for the deer that live on your farm or could be in the area that you hunt. Shouldn't say they live on your farm because a lot of times the bucks will bachelor group on a bean field, then they'll disperse, you know. But they're still in the area. They're going to come back to that farm at some point. And if you've gotten data of them over the years, then you'll know when those days are, you know. So.
So when are you doing your scouting in the woods? Is that something you do while you're hunting in the fall, or wait till late season?
Yes and yes, yeah. I scout a lot in late season once the season ends because, like with me, I mean it's my only hobby, so the season never ends. I'm just always doing it,
Right.
You know. But I like to scout in the wintertime because that's when you can see the terrain features that funnels deer down through certain areas. You can follow big tracks back to beds and find where bedding areas are. You can see how a buck moves through a property, you know, like that. And you keep that in the back of your mind, but you don't just go off of that because then you have to, when the season's going, you have to also go and check and make sure that the sign's there, you know, and make sure that that it's a relevant place to be hunting. So I do scout in the postseason, and then I leave summer, basically go to cameras, and then during the season, you know, I'll scout during the season as I go. A lot of guys, they only hunt during the season. They don't scout. Like they already know that, okay, I got my stand up, you know, I saw, you know, something here in the wintertime. So I put my stand here, and then they go and sit there, you know, and you have to move, you know, find the hot sign because that's where the deer are going to be. So.
Well, I really appreciate you coming and
Yep,
speaking.
no problem.
Thank
Good
you.
time.
Like I said, I'd like to talk to you more for sure. There's just so much I'd like to ask, basically. So I hope you had enjoyable time with us.
No, it was good. Actually, it works better. Like I said, it works better like this. I've done one before in person like that, and I can talk better because when I've done these on over the phone before, like I start talking about something, I totally forget what I was even talking about. Then they ask you another question, you weren't even ready for it, you know. So and then, you know, I feel like I leave things out. So this did work good. All 3 people asking me questions. I liked it a lot better. Probably the best one I've done, I think. You know, so
We appreciate that.
no problem. Good questions.
I guess we'll leave it at that. Thanks again, and thank you guys for listening, and make sure you guys are all getting outside.